Gute Woche en een veilige Chodesh en een veilige Chanukah. We'll go straight to our questions. So the first question which we have is a couple of, this is the anchor if anyone wants for the recordings. Baruch Hashem, it's available. So this is a question which a couple of people asked me. And that is, why is there no mention of Hanukkah, or Purim for that matter, in Al HaMichya? So this question has been addressed by, actually, Reb Chaim Brisker. I heard it years ago, and you can see here, here's a quote from a Haggadah called Mi Beis Halevi, where it has this whole beer of Reb Chaim. And the way he explains it is, let's go back to the bracha. The technical name, or the halachic term for this bracha, is bracha me'ein shalish. It's a condensed form of three brachas. The benching consists of hazonas hakoil. Second bracha is al ha'oretz val ha'mozoin. And the third bracha starts with the rachem, mentions about Yerushalayim, ends off uvnei Yerushalayim. So there you see on the board, highlighted, Al HaMichya Val Kalkala, that's relating to the first bracha. Al Eretz Chem Dotoivo, that's the condensed form of the second bracha. Rachem No Hashem Elokeinu, through to Vnei Yerushalayim HaKodesh, that corresponds to the third bracha of benching, and hence the term Me'en Shalish. Towards the end, we have then Ki Ata Hashem Toivo Meitiv. That is already the fourth bracha of the benching. Okay, Lavina Malkeinu HaToivo, that's the bracha HaToivo Meitiv. So the original form of this bracha was only Me'en Shalish. The last piece, Ki Ata Hashem Toivo Meitiv, you look in the Rambam, it seems to have been added at a later stage. And it's not so rigid. And certainly the Rambam writes, that the mention of the Yomim Tovim, the L'Rtzei B'Chalitzeinu, this is also a later innovation. And this is important to know, that if you said Al HaMichya on Shabbos and you forgot to say L'Rtzei B'Chalitzeinu, you do not have to repeat, because it's not imperative to be mentioned there altogether. That's the way it appears from the Rambam. But meanwhile, Reb Chaim asks a question. Why in benching, Ritzei comes before Ovnei Yerushalayim? Why in the condensed form, in Me'en Shalish, does Ritzei, or the mention of Rosh Chodesh, why does it come after Ovnei Yerushalayim? So that's the question, one question. Second question he asks, there's a Gemara in Brachos, Daf Chavtes Amud Aleph, and it talks about a condensed form of Shmoina Esrei. It's not the whole Shmoina Esrei, it's the middle 12 or 13 brachas, and it starts off with the words Havinenu, and it's a condensed form where it will give 3-4 words for each of the 12 brachas. So if a person's in extreme rush, etc., under pressure, they could shorten the davening and just say first 3 brachas, Havinenu, and the last 3 brachas. Save a couple of minutes. Fine. Says the Gemara that a person could say Havinenu throughout the year, under pressure, obviously, but not Motzei Shabbos, nor Motzei Yom Tov, because you have to include in the bracha of Ata Choinein, you have to include Havdalah. Now, in the condensed form, you're not going to be able to squeeze into the condensed form. You won't be able to squeeze in a mention of Havdalah, and that's Motzei Shabbos. Later on, Rav Bever Bar Abaya says you can't do this in the winter when you need to ask for the Saint Alamotor. You have a bracha, Mevorach Hashoni, which is a general bracha of request for parnosa, for provision of sustenance, but there's a specific addition which we add in the winter where we ask for rain. Now, again, you wouldn't be able to squeeze that in the condensed form. So let's explain that again. In a regular full for version, you can afford to squeeze in another couple of words about an additional request. But if the whole mention of this inyan is in a condensed form, see, if you squeeze in a request, that request will be as long as the bracha itself. So if you have 3 words, Havininu Hashem Lasid Lodas Drochecha, 4 words, and you're going to put in there a couple of words about Motzei Shabbos, well, then it's going to give, in the condensed form, Motzei Shabbos features as another bracha. So in the condensed form, you can't really squeeze in extra mentions. That's the halacha in the Gemara. Fine. So how can you say bracha me'en shalish on Shabbos? Well, the kasha is not so big kasha, because I mentioned before that it's not imperative to say v'ayotzeach l'tein. It's a later addition. But all right, the kasha is, it's nice. Why do you need to have mention? How could you say a condensed form on Shabbos when you cannot, in a condensed form, you can't really include about the mention of Shabbos? So here's the Geshmakachap. What happens when you just said of Neir Shalayim and you realize, oops, I didn't say Ritzei, or I didn't say Yalav Yovai. So you've got a whole list of brachas in the benching. Now, typically in the benches which you have, they cut out all the extras, so to speak. And Murphy's law is when you forget, you're going to be using one of those shortened benches. But in the Siddur, we have this. If you forgot to say Ritzei and you haven't started the 4th bracha, you just right at this point, Shenosan Shabbos Lemnucha, you'll say an extra bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem Shenosan Shabbos Lemnucha, and the same thing if it was Yom Tov, you'll add in a different bracha. Nosan Yom Tov and Am Yisrael is Nesosel Simchas Yom Chag Pesach Hazeh, for example, Chag Matzah, sorry, and Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadosh Yisrael Bazmanim. Here, there's a difference between if it's Shabbos and Yom Tov, where it starts and ends with Baruch. If it's Rosh Chodesh, so then it starts with Baruch and doesn't end with Baruch. So if it's on Rosh Chodesh, you forgot the Yalav Yovai, and you remembered before you started the 4th bracha, so then you'd say, Shenosan Baruch Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, Shenosan Rosh Chodoshim Leyama Yisrael Lezikar. Okay, so now let's come back. Says Reb Chaim, a very gishmak. When it comes on Shabbos, you cannot include Shabbos inside the 3rd bracha. So Shabbos comes after the 3rd bracha, before HaTorah HaMeitiv. So on the Ritzei B'Chalitzeinu, which we say on Shabbos, is not in place of the Ritzei B'Chalitzeinu, which we say within the 3rd bracha of benching. Rather, the Ritzei B'Chalitzeinu, which we say on Shabbos in Me'en Sholosh, is substituting for this bracha in the event that you didn't say Ritzei. And the same thing in Yalav Yov, etc. So in a sense, Reb Chaim is suggesting that on Shabbos, we shouldn't really call it Me'en Sholosh, we should call it Me'en Chomesh. He doesn't say that, I'm just throwing it in sense that and that's why the Ritzei or the mention of Rosh Chodesh, etc., comes after V'nei Yerushalayim. You finish the 3 condensed forms of brachas, and then you mention the Yom Tov, which you want to mention, and then you go on to Kiyat Hashem Tov Meitiv, which is the 5th bracha in this context. And this, therefore, answers the question about Al HaNisim. Well, because Al HaNisim would belong in the 2nd bracha, and you cannot park a mention of Hanukkah and Purim within a condensed form. Therefore, unfortunately, you cannot have a mention of Hanukkah and Purim in Me'en Sholosh. With Yalav Yov or Ritzei, you can do it after Uvnei Yerushalayim before Hashateva Meitiv. So that's the answer to that. Very, and in simple words, because it's a condensed form, you cannot include Al HaNisim, whereas the bracha for Shabbos or for Yom Tov, that it can be included as almost like a standalone within the condensed form. Okay, so that's that shtickle. Okay, let's move on. So here I had a question. Actually, again, interesting. 2 different people asked me this question about a blind person lighting the menorah. So this is, you have in front of you, you have a Mogen Avraham. And the Mogen Avraham is in Tofresh Ein Hey. A blind person, he says, if the person could join in with someone else at the same residence, paying a few pence to join in, fine. If it's a blind person who has a wife who is able to see, so she should be lighting. If, however, he is not, he's alone and he lives on his own, so he should light with assistance with someone else, because a blind person, halacha, is bound to do all the mitzvahs. There's a whole discussion in Gemara whether a blind person is chayiv b'mitzvahs, not chayiv b'mitzvahs. The bottom line halacha is that a blind person is chayiv b'mitzvahs. Now, what about when it comes to the Havdalah? There we say that a blind person does not make a bracha b'yom ha'esh. So there the Gemara says clearly, you have to have benefit from the light. And that's why the reason why we lift our fingers as if to say we are benefiting from the light. But here it's persumanisa. It's the idea to project the message to the outside, to remind people of the miracles of Hanukkah. So that it's not negay whether you see or not. That is how and he quotes here the Marshal, Shuvas Rashal, I think it's in my involved, whatever. Okay. That would have been fine, but then the Rabbi Yaakov Emden has got a sefer called Moir Uktzia, and this is his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, and he raises some objections to it, and he says a blind person not really a proper mechiyov, and somehow he raises some kind of problems since he can't see it, and so. Yeah, seriously speaking, if a person who is unable to hear, who's got no sense of hearing, will not be able to be a Baal Tekeah, even if they blow very well, because they are, unfortunately, disqualified from this mitzvah, so they can't be moitzi anyone. So here he's arguing that if you can't see, he doesn't have the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah. I found it a very, and this Moir Uktzia, this Rabbi Yaakov Emden is quoted in Sha'arei Tshuva, is quoted by the Mishnah Berurah as if it's a halacha. I have a very simple question to him. Why, according to you, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, a blind person should be exempt from tzitzis? Because the whole mitzvah of tzitzis is that you should see them. And I just see how you have from Shulchan Aruch, it says, Eksus Summa, the garment of a blind person is bound to have tzitzis, because even he can't do or he can't see the tzitzis, but others can see it. Even if a blind person wears this garment, he has to have a four-cornered garment, he has to wear it, put in tzitzis. So, I mean, if you're saying that because you can't see, therefore you doesn't have to do the mitzvah. So I felt that I'm happy to go according to the Mogen Avraham, who goes according to the Marshal, and doesn't make any business about not making a bracha or anything. He just seems to be saying that halacha is a blind person can make a bracha, and then someone actually showed me that Rav Vosner, Shevet HaLevi, so he has a tshuva where he says he doesn't really understand the Rabbi Yaakov Emden, and he doesn't understand why the Mishnah Berurah took him so carte blanche, because it doesn't really add up. So bottom line is, I'm happy to remain that a blind person should be able to light the menorah with a bracha, because it's pesumanissa for other people. I recall, I didn't look this up now, but just recall that when it came out with the Birchas HaChamo, there was an interesting thing, whether a blind person is able to do Birchas HaChamo or not. At the time, Reb Chaim Rappaport had published a sefer through Kahos about this, and following on after that, there was a whole discussion whether a blind person can do Kiddush Levana, whether a blind person can make a bracha. Let's say there's a story in the Gemara about one of the Amoraim, a king arrived in town, And he did say that the Amora did say the bracha because he was aware of the prestige of the Melech. Okay, that's another discussion. But meanwhile, let's remain with this halacha, like some of the Magen Avraham, that a blind person can make a bracha on the Menorah. Here's an interesting question. It's all Hanukkah questions for the moment. Reuven, his mother is in hospital in a critical state, and it's important for someone to be with her. So he's with his mother, and he was with his mother the first night of Hanukkah. And in the hospital, it wasn't possible to light the menorah. So he relied on the fact that his wife is lighting the menorah back home. For the second night of Hanukkah, his wife kindly switched with him, and she stayed with her mother-in-law in the hospital, and Reuven went home. So the first night, we say 3 brachas. The second night, we only say 2 brachas. So Reuven sends me a question. Was it Monday or Tuesday? I remember which day. He told me the situation. Do I make a bracha tonight? It's an interesting question. So here we have in Mishnah Berurah in Siman Tov Resh Ayin Vav. We'll read this Zion. It talks in the Mechaber, it says, if a person did not light the menorah and there's no one home, so if he sees a menorah, he should say the bracha she'osa nisim, and he should also, if it's the first night, he should say shechianu. The following night, even if he is lighting, he would not say shechianu because he said shechianu, but that's not identical with our situation. There he said shechianu the first night, not on lighting, but on seeing. Here the question is his first lighting also. Now, so here the Mishnah Berurah comes to the rescue. If he says in be'esmol, if the first night he did not make a bracha at all because his wife, he relied on his wife lighting at home, as we mentioned, it's evident from the Mechaber, from the Shulchan Aruch, that if his wife lights for him at home, it's as if he himself had lit. So then it comes the second night, he would not say shechianu. So the fact that his yotze with his wife is not only his yotze with the mitzvah, but is also yotze with the brachas. So when she said shechianu at home, she was moitzi him, and therefore there's no point in him saying shechianu the following night, because he already has said shechianu vicariously through his wife saying when she lit. Let's move on to something which I found myself confused. I usually lane in our minyan in Shul, and it came the second day of Hanukkah, and I was a bit confused. Do I start with Bayom Hasheni or Bayom Harishon? The reason why I was confused is because on Sukkot it is the last Aliyah which kind of expresses the day of Sukkot. So on the third day of Sukkot, it's going to be the last Aliyah, which will be Vayom HaShlishi. I know it's also two because of Svekot Yoma, but the one who's going to express the day of which day of Sukkot it is going to be the last Aliyah. So I was in my mind confused. Perhaps it should be the first Aliyah should be Rishon, should be Kohen and Levi, and the Yisrael should say Bayom HaSheni, which is the same day. So I looked around. Why? So this is my question. I'm curious. Why is there a difference between Hanukkah and Sukkot? Why is it on Hanukkah that the one who reads the first Aliyah is going to be the number of the day of the week, which number of the day of which day of Hanukkah it is, whereas Sukkot, the first Aliyah will not necessarily express which day of Sukkot it is. It's going to be the last Aliyah, which will kind of be the calendar, so to speak. So the answer is, all right, so they hear the Levush, he asks another question. Well, normally, we don't repeat what the previous Aliyah had said, unless there's a need for it. On the Rosh Chodesh, we have a need to fit in, but generally we don't repeat. why don't we do the second day of Hanukkah, we'll do Sheni and Shlishi. The third day on Hanukkah, we'll do Revi and Chamishi. And the fourth day of Hanukkah, we'll do Shishi and Shvi. We can afford it because we've got enough material to be able to do new stuff every day. So why are we each day repeating what was done yesterday? And he answers very, very practical. It's very confusing because all of these parashas, when you see them, they are almost identical. Just the names change, but and the number of the day, but otherwise they are almost identical. So therefore, it's so much. You're asking for trouble by doing that, and it's better just to have each day will express that you'll start off with the day of Hanukkah that it is. Very practical. So what about Sukkot? On Sukkot, think about this. On the 6th day of Sukkot, you need to give 3 aliyahs. If you're going to start off by Yom HaShishi, and then you'll have Yom HaShvi, what are you going to do for Shlishi? You're going to go back. In other words, the 6th and the 7th day of Sukkot, if you would start off with Yom HaShishi or Yom HaShvi, you won't be able to accommodate the other 2 aliyahs unless you'd go back. And therefore, on Sukkot, for that very reason, it's been left that it's the last aliyah which is faithful to the day of Sukkot that it is, and the other aliyahs will read however it works out. But it's yeah. You may know that in Eretz Yisrael they just do the same thing again and again, but yeah. Actually, the Chanukah they also have that they do again and again, but in Ashkenazim we do the way we do, which is right. So that's about the Kriyas HaTorah. Okay. So then now someone asks the question: why is it the Chabad custom to light the Menorah in Shul before Aleinu? Now, there's 2 issues here. I haven't been very often in other shuls at lighting Menorah to know what their minhag is. I understand that many shuls they light Ma'ariv time rather than Mincha time. In Shulchan Aruch it says Madlig, the concept of lighting Menorah in Shul is mentioned in Tofresh Ayin Aleph, and it says Madlikin bein Mincha leMa'ariv. And so that's what we do. But what is the reason for Madlikin bein Mincha leMa'ariv? So the Mr. Brewer says because that's when you have the olam, that's when you have the crowd there. What he seems to be suggesting is, if you light it after Ma'ariv, then everyone's rushing off to their house to light Menorah. Therefore, light it after Mincha, before Ma'ariv, and then at least people are there for the duration of Ma'ariv, so they will be able to see the Menorah. So I was bothered by this, because that's all very well for minhag, the old minhag, which was to daven mincha and ma'ariv one after the other, which is done in many communities today, where they would otherwise the people wouldn't come back. So in Simon Resh Lamed Gimel brought la halacha in the Mishnah that you can be makel to have mincha ma'ariv in succession. But according to the Alter Rebbe, who says that nowadays we're noyeg to daven ma'ariv bismano. Where does Alter Rebbe say this? Interesting. It's a one line in the Tshuva where the Alter Rebbe talks about the knives for shchita, and he says the Alter Rebbe introduced a new type of chalaf, a type of knife which is much sharper, smoother. So the word in Hebrew is sakinim melotoshim. And he says, don't say, oh, if we'll introduce these new knives, it will be casting aspersions on the knives and the shechita for generations. He says, it's okay, we can make improvements. For example, he says 2 other examples. He says how people of late have become more careful about chodosh, and people of late have become more careful to daven ma'ariv bismano. So So here we have so he mentions there about davening by Bismano, and that's become now in more Hamish circles. You have the davening Ma'ariv Bismano. So then that which Mr. Brewer says that the reason between Mincha and Ma'ariv is because then you have the crowd. That's not really the case. Fortunately, in Chabad we have this very long nigun. I heard that the history of the nigun in Chabad is from the times of the Rebbe Maharash. The Rebbe Maharash very rarely showed his face in public, and when it was davening time, there was another room next to the shul, and he would daven in that private room. So even during davening, the Olam didn't see the Rebbe. The only time, one of the few times he was in view, was by Chanukah. He would come out to see the menorah being lit in shul. So the Chassidim composed a very long nigun, so that you should have more time to see the Rebbe. So it's the nigun which we have. It takes at least 5 minutes. Yeah, it's a long nigun. All right. So with this, by the way, we've also gained that we have the crowd is there a little bit longer. But I saw also that the Mishnah, the Levush is going back about 400 years. So he writes that we know again to light ben mincha l'mayriv shu tchilas hachnosas hayoyim habo shetfilas arvis hi min hayoyim habo. We light after mincha, which is the beginning of the entry of the coming day. Mayriv is ready. The following day is coming. So, all right, be that as it may, our meaning is that we light after mincha. And so now we've discussed that. Now the question is why before Oleinu? So it's not so well documented, this. Even Chabad in Hogim it doesn't say. But you know what? I saw this by my, we weren't born yesterday. We've seen what's going on in the Mesorah from generation to generation. And so therefore, if we're doing it now before Aleinu, probably that's how it's been done for generations. So the question is why? So here there's a letter, which you have on the board, on the screen, a letter from Reb Chaim Noah to Rabbi Yitzchak Dubav alav Shalom. So, and this has been published in several places. And he explains how Oleinu is always, he uses the term, it's the makeh b'patish. It's the last it's a finishing touch to davening. So, for example, Megillah is before Oleinu, Sfira Soim is before Oleinu, Kinnis is before Oleinu, in Rosh Hashanah by night we say LaDavid Mizmor is before Oleinu, he says, because Oleinu in a sense is the last. It's interesting, but what about the tilling which we add on every morning? But that's a good question. But meanwhile, this is what he's saying, that Aleinu is basically the finish of davening. I just want to point out, if you think about those words Aleinu, it's at the point where the person is finished davening, is about to go out to the street. And there he says these words, Aleinu Shabeach, that we thank Hashem, how we're different to the Goyei Harotzos. It's the moment when you're going to go out and confront the Goyei Harotzos on the street. You're going to have to deal with them in business, etc. It's at that time you get that, that it's extra chizuk before you leave the house, you leave the shul, you see Aleinu. So what Reb Chaim Noah is saying, that Aleinu is it's always, or any other mitzvahs, to the point that even the fact that we have a minhag of saying Aleinu after a bris, so Yaakov Emden says that this originates from the fact that a bris would normally take place in shul right after Shacharis, and so said Aleinu after the bris. So again, so Aleinu is the last thing, and we try. If there's another, a mitzvah to be done that morning, it's done before Aleinu, and Aleinu is the last thing. So that's Reb Chaim Noah's take on it. Okay, let's move on. So now, a gentleman who often writes to me various Lomdische questions, and he was concerned about this public menorah. Now, the menorah in Manhattan, this is the Yaakov Agam menorah, I think Fifth Avenue or something like that. Somewhere it's in Manhattan, and it's billed as the world's tallest menorah. Now, it is described as being 36 feet high. Now, if you take 36 feet and translate that into meters, it's about 10.5 meters. Now, the menorah mustn't be more than 20 amos high. How much is an amo? So according to Reb Chaim Noah, an amo is 48 centimeters approximately. So that means that 20 amos is about 9.5 meters, I think 960. So if it's 36 feet high, it's that much higher than the shear of 20 amo. But when it was, I remember reading, and I couldn't find this in the discussions, there was a discussion about this. It was specifically designed that it should be within the shear. And there's two girsos. Is it 36 feet high or 32 feet high? It depends which newspaper you want to believe. Now, 32 feet is a bit helpful. It's still a little bit higher than 20 amos, according to Reb Chaim Noah. But I pointed out to Rabbi Ginsburg, who writes in the Iskashos, that when they tell you in the newspaper that it's so tall, they're talking about overall dimensions. And so the shamus is also part of that overall dimension. So if you would take off the height of the shamash, the flames are actually within the 20 amos shear. That's how I worked out the last time it was, and that solves the. It was built with the kavona, and we carefully, and it's worked out. It should be within the shear, and definitely these tall menorahs are. If they make a brocha, then they definitely make a point that should be within the 20 amos. Right. Someone was asking, in our shul, we're having in our shul we are knowing, since the Rebbe's encouragement, that the menorah should be a light for the whole 24 hours, if possible. If the children won't tamper with it, if the menorah could be a light. So we're using yortzeit candles for the menorah. So it doesn't have to be, but the shamus is also a yortzeit candle. Now, it's not very convenient to use a yortzeit candle to light other candles. So someone asked, why do we need a shamus? If you're using another lighter in any case, what do you need a shamus for? So it reminded me of a similar question. Someone asked the Rebbe, why do you need to have a shamash for the menorah when it's during the daytime? Because there is a minhag to light the menorah, also have the menorah alight during Hallel particularly. And that's because according to the Shittas Rambam, the menorah, when it says in the morning they would hativas haneres doesn't just mean they would clean it out, but they actually would rekindle it every morning. So according to Rambam, it was lit in the morning also. That seems to be the background for the minhag, that the menorah in Shul, which is reminiscent obviously of the menorah in the Mishkan, in Beis Hamikdash, so it's in the morning. So someone asked the Rebbe, why is there a need for shamus in the morning? To explain, one of the reasons for the shamus is that in case someone reads near the menorah, one shouldn't say he's enjoying benefit from the menorah itself, from the regular. You're not allowed to have benefit from them. So you say he's enjoying the benefit from the shamus. But during the day, where there's plenty of natural light, so why do you need a shamus? The shuls used to be built with tall windows, so there's a lot of natural light. And so what's the need for a shamus during the day? So this is where the Rebbe answers. This is in back of the Kodesichus Chelik Yud. Yesh loima sheyesh oid ta'amim be'inyan hashamesh. There are other reasons for the shamesh. K'moi sheloi koshel ba'adlochas ner miner. For example, if one of the candles goes out. So if one of your candles goes out, you shouldn't take a match and put it to one candle to light the other candle. So you have the shamesh there, in case you need to rekindle one of the lights, you'll take the flame from the shamus rather than from one of the lights of the mitzvah. There's another idea of the shamus being comparable to the kohen who is there standing and lighting the neiros. And this comparison to the kohen who is serving is an explanation why typically the shamus stands taller. In most menorahs, the shamus stands taller than the other neiros, and we have the idea Srofim Oimdim Mimaloi. We have the pasuk of the way it talks about the burning gate, the fiery angel standing above the Shekhinah. Okay, and Poskim bring this as a simon that the shamus stands higher than the other neiros. So this time, why does the shamus stand higher? So it's like compared to the kohen who's lighting the neiros. So there's other reasons for the shamus besides just that you shouldn't read by the neiros, etc. And so that also explains why we have a shamish, even though we're not actually using it for lighting the other ones directly. Why, when I did the menorah, actually, I first lit that yortzeit candle for the shamas, and then used that to light the other candles. Okay, let's go on. Okay, this is not a Hanukkah shaila. Someone's walking the street on Shabbos, and the wind blew off his scarf, and it landed on the front wall, on the wall of a front garden. So now he's asking, can he, standing in the street, take the scarf off the fence or off the wall and put it on his around his neck? And the answer is basically no. And the reason is that the wall of the wall which is creating a Rosh Hashanah, the wall which is creating Rosh Hashanah is itself a Rosh Hashanah. So the front wall of a premises is causing the inside to be Rosh Hashanah. Therefore, that wall itself is Rosh Hashanah. Because of that, he's not allowed to take the scarf off that wall and while standing in the street. What he can do is go into the front garden and take it off the fence from the inside. Then it's within Rosh Hashanah, and then wears it, puts it on his neck. That's okay. I mentioned last night, we had a rehearsal last night on these shilas. So if it falls onto a hedge, there I don't know what the solution would be, because you're not allowed to use gidule karka. And so, for example, if someone had left a jacket hanging on a tree, let's say it could be a bit of a branch sticking out, you have a problem on Shabbos taking it off. Or if a ball gets stuck in a tree, it's going to be a problem on Shabbos to remove it, because emish tamshin b'gidule karka. So if your scarf is on a hedge, I have a problem of taking it off on Shabbos. Now, going back to the previous question, thank you, Rebbe Levi, pointing out the Sofim Oimdim Mimar Loi is a remez because Loi is 36, and you got 36 candles, so to speak, in the 8 days of Hanukkah. So the Sofim Oimdim Mimar Loi is the shamus standing above the 36 candles. Thank you. Right. Someone asked me this question during this week. If a Jew owns a property, it's rented out on AirBNB, and it's mostly going to be used by Goyim, does he need to have a Mezuza? So this is what we see. It's not so clear, but that's what this is one of the Sforim on Mezuza. It's Pischei She'orim by Schechter. So he has here a room which is rented out to Goyim near the bottom of Mezuza. Earlier on, he's not so clear about that. So if you would have a room within your house, let's say if you had a au pair caretaker who lives within your house, then that room should have to have a mezuzah, because it's part of the domestic use. But when it's a standalone dwelling, which is not part of your dwelling, the mezuzah is where you live, or you have your personal effects there. If it's nothing to do with your personal stuff, then it doesn't need to have a mezuzah. So let's say a storage room, which is a storage room which is, even if it's not part of the house, but if it's storing domestic stuff, then it would need to have a mezuzah. But if you have a freestanding shed and it's not used for domestic stuff, then it would be apart from a mezuzah. Okay, so that, and then there's another consideration, and that is that whenever there's a chashash of bizoyin, where we're worried that the mezuzah might be disgraced, that's also a reason not to have a mezuzah. That's one of the reasons why, if there's a door which is shared with a goy and a yid. Let's say it's a two-family house, and there's a shared entrance. So the halacha is it doesn't need to have a mezuzah. So one of the reasons given for this is because of the worry that the goy might disgrace it. So that's one of the reasons why we don't give a goy a mezuzah. Also, even if he asks for it, we try to avoid it because of it may become lidei bizoyin. So with an AirBNB, yes, so someone's pointing out that AirBNB obviously would have your furniture, and reading that earlier comment, he seems to be suggesting if it's a furnished dwelling, you would need to have mezuzah. But then the bottom line of the middle quote, the middle paragraph, so that still that you have that mezuzah out there, and a guy comes on Airbnb, nothing stopping him from ripping that mezuzah off the door. There is the idea that the guy might even be worried that the Yidden are casting some kind of kishuf on him, and so they may have some anxiety about the mezuzah being there, and therefore it might become lidei bizoyin, and that's the reason for not having it there. Let's move on. Okay. So then my 10th question is, it's not on the sheet and not on the screen, but a shliach asks me about wine, about having to have a yain mevushal in the presence of non-shomer Shabbos. And he says that we have shluchim are often confronted with this problem, that they invite a person in the community, and the person comes around before Shabbos, brings an expensive bottle of kosher wine, non-mevushal, and then it comes to the Shabbos meal, and you're not serving it. Why? Because the person is not a shomer Shabbos at all, and it becomes a bit awkward. So is that chumrah? Is that necessary to be so machmir? This is his question. Can we cut corners on that one? So we have a couple of minutes, and so I want to share a little fabreng about this. Yeah. So first of all, there's a very beautiful story with Rebitcha Masmid and the Frierdiker Rebbe. This story was told by Reb Simcha Garadetsky, and I understand the story took place in Leningrad after the Rebbe had moved. First, it was in Rostov the first couple of years, perhaps after the Stalkos, but I understand it was Leningrad, and Chatshefegin was the Rebbe's Gabe. And for some reason, it was an evening that Chatshefegin wasn't able to be on duty, and so he asked Reb Simcha to be on duty for Yechidus. No? So one of the people who went to Yechidus that night was Rebitcha Masmid. And Rebitcha, so Reb Simcha was there in the room whilst this conversation took place. So Rebitcha told the Rebbe the following, that he generally, Rebitcha had this phenomenal hidur mitzvah and his zehirus, and he was extremely cautious about mitzvahs. And let's keep to the point. So Rebitcha was particular that he would only eat meat or chicken if he had seen the knife of the shochet and checked it that it's okay, check the chalav, and then he would eat from it. If he was happy with it, he would eat it. Perfect. So he was in a particular town, and he was staying by a family, and before Shabbos, the shochet came around, and he checked the knife. He was satisfied. The shochet checked the chicken. And the Balabosta was going to make food for Rebitcha with this. It comes Shabbos afternoon. And by the time Rebitcha finished davening, and I've forgotten the name of the other chassid. He mentioned the name of another prominent chassid. And the Balabosta served kugel. And the other chassid had eaten some of the kugel. Rebitcha Masmid comes, and she serves him the kugel, and he just can't eat it. Es geht etwas nicht. And he turns to the Balabosta or whatever. He says, which schmaltz did you make the kugel with? Was it from that chicken? Oi, I'm sorry, we ran out of schmaltz. It wasn't enough from that chicken. I took some other schmaltz. And so all right, so she was sensitive that the kugel wasn't from the schmalt, from the chicken, which was shechted, where he had checked the knife. And he says to the Rebbe, that I'm indulging in chumras which are beyond my standard. The other chassid, the chassid, is a much bigger chassid than me, and he was able to eat the kugel, and I wasn't able to eat the kugel. Hastes that I'm indulging in chumras which are beyond my level. And he asked the Rebbe for it, for advice, for a tikkun. So the Rebbe says to him, you have to be very careful what you eat. This was the Rebbe's response. That you're talking about a person who has Ruach HaKodesh to a level. And the Rebbe says, you have to be careful what you eat. Wine particularly, we're very, very careful about wine. Well, it says, Nichnas Yain Yotza Soid, Yain is Gematria 70, Soid is Gematria 70, people taking wine, their secrets come out. Wine is very, very, very powerful. In Torah, it's seen as a very powerful thing. There's a sefer which I have from Menosson Shapira called Matzas Shimurim, and he has a whole section on Yain HaMashumer. We know that the Rebbe was extremely, how do you say, whatever the word is, very, very careful. And he kept the wine in his room in 770, and he would take wine home for Shabbos in a bottle. He was like extremely, how do you say, protective of the wine. Shouldn't be touched by someone else or something like that. Very, very interesting. So we have to be careful. And so that's my first point about this. So then the other point about this, I want to share with you a fascinating anecdote, which I read this week. This is a quote from the Kfar Chabad magazine. Rabbi Chitrik of Tzfas is telling this, what he heard from Rabbi Vremel Shem Tov, the chairman of Agudas Chassidut Chabad. It was many years that the president of the United States would sign a proclamation honoring Yud Aleph Nisan as the Day of Education for the USA. This would be an honor for the Rebbe. Part of this honor, this process, is that there's a delegation of shluchim who go to Washington and they meet with the president, and it's in their presence that the president signs the proclamation. One time, the Rebbe received a photograph of this signature, the signing event, and he saw the shluchim are all wearing jackets, but they're not wearing hats. And the Rebbe said you felt in Ge'enyank, missing in Ge'enyank, missing in prestige, of Yiddish prestige. No, I mentioned this story by the Farbrengen today, and someone questioned, because there's a slightly different story with almost a similar comment of the Rebbe, and it's unlikely the same story happened twice, the same comment. But the story was, I think it was President Carter, and there had been something with Iran. I don't remember all the details, and the President Carter hadn't come out to the public for months, and then there was came Hanukkah, and they made a Hanukkah celebration in the White House, and so it was, let's say, 5th night of Hanukkah, 6th night of Hanukkah, whatever it was the middle of Hanukkah, and possibly they had discussed the idea of Hanukkah being every day to add light. And it was one of the senators, a Jewish senator, so his son, a young bar mitzvah boy, whatever, was given to light the menorah. And the president, somehow he asked if they could light all the candles, not just the 5 candles or the 6 candles. And it was very awkward to refuse the president. And so whoever was there acquiesced and lit the full amount. And the Rebbe's comment was afterwards that he where was the Gaon Yaakov? Where was the Jewish pride, so to speak? The point is, I think it doesn't really matter this detail or that. Oh, so I mentioned this by the Farbrengen. And so then Rabbi Aaron Tifferbrun told me that when the late Avram Yitzchak Glick went to visit, had an official visit with the King of Spain, Juan Carlos. This was in the 80s. It was got to do with the Messima Rambam, because the Rambam was lived in Spain. The Rebbe told him to investigate, find out the protocol, and but the Rebbe gave him 10 points of protocol. One is that he should say that he should wear his hat, and you should say that this is part of the respect of this is as a rabbi. On the contrary, he's wearing his hat out of respect. The other one was about the fact that he won't shake hands with the Queen is also out of respect. So these are a couple of points. But the Rebbe told, this is one of the protocols the Rebbe gave him, that he should wear his hat. So let's just start to analyze what's going on here. You're a guest in someone else's house, and their protocol, it's in a very prestigious house, it's a White House or a palace, and they are saying this is the protocol over here, and yet the Rebbe is expecting a chassid to have Gaon Yaakov and to say, this is, I'm a shliach, I'm a chassid, this is the way this is who I am. Now let's come back to the question over here. You're a shliach and you are a mashpia. A guest comes along and brings you a bottle of wine, and it's going to be a compromise on your standards. So then, who's the mashpia, who's the mushpa? And it's perhaps I'm out of place of saying to a shliach, but a person has Mesiras Nefesh, himself and his whole family for a whole life being out there, but for the dominion. So you are the one, you are the mashpia, and you have to be able to make that decision that there are things which are not up to your standard. And what happens if they bring on Shabbos? And what happens if they bring you whiskey on Pesach? And what happens if they bring you, there can be so many different inyonim. I'm sure every shliach will tell you stories where people have brought them things, and you have to have the wisdom and the Be'ez Hashem, the siyata d'shmaya, to be able to handle the situation that you are the mashpia, and therefore you're not going to have someone come into your place and to bring down your standards. And if there is a chashash, so you have to be conscientious of it. I just want to finish off on mentioned by the Farbrengen today, that there was Rebbe Tzin Shem Tov. So he would take the Rebbe's letter and read it out go to other shuls. So he went to 86 Kaisnev Road, which was a Satmar Rebbe's Medrash. And this is going back about probably 50 years ago. And there's a multimillionaire who's the patron of the shul, etc. And Rebbe Tzin starts reading the Rebbe's letter. And this millionaire there was shoving his chair or disturbing. He wasn't keen. It's my shul, you coming in and doing your stuff. And Rebbe Tzin turned to him. He says, "You have got more chutzpah than money." That's something. He's walking into the other person's shul, and he's reading the Rebbe's letter. The other guy, the host of the shul, and I'm not saying that everyone has to take that approach. We're talking about the idea of Ner Chanukah mibachutz, but if you make a fire outside, well, are you liable if you don't make? All right, but on the other hand, the Gaon Yaakov, that you're shliach, and you are going to set the standard, and wherever you are, whether it's the hat or whether it's going to be whatever it may be, a standard, but you are shliach, and wherever you are, you're going to keep up that standard. So that's my little Farbrengen about this topic, and lots of l'chaim on that. Let's have one more point over here, almost to finish our time slot, and that is one of our contacts. Two things are left. One is about, I had mentioned last week about a woman who's not going to daven. What does she do about Kiddush? And I'd said if she's not going to daven, then she'd actually make Kiddush before breakfast. So there is a tshuva of, someone pointed out to me, there's a tshuva of Reb Moshe Feinstein in Igros Moshe, where he says because a woman is bound to eat the meal with her husband, therefore at 9 o'clock in the morning, it's not mealtime yet, and therefore she doesn't have to make Kiddush. All right, it's an interesting svara. I don't know how convincing it is. So there is room. All right, well, Moshe is certainly an eminent posek. So there was room to be makel on that, but I'm not so convinced with the svara. And so if she is not davening, I would still say that she should try to make Kiddush on her own before she has breakfast. Okay, let's finish off with this point. One of our regular listeners on the recording sent me the following observation. We know that there's a difference between migdol and magdil in benching, and so the earliest record of this is in the Abu Darham. I'm not sure which the person wrote to me which it's printed, but it's printed at least 500 years ago. And the Abu Darham, I mean, the difference between migdol and magdil, one is in Tilim. In Tilim, it's magdil, and the same song, the same shira appears in Sefer Shmuel, and there it's read migdol. So let's read Abu Darham. Kibalti miraboisai. On Shabbos, one should say migdol Yeshuas Malkoi with a vav. In the weekday, we should say magdil with a yud. V'nirili hatam. What's the reason for this distinction? Because Shabbos, hu melech godel. Shabbos is like a big king, in comparison to the weekday. So migdol is the idea of, perhaps alluding to the idea of melech godel. Migdol hu molei bevav, v'cholam bevav hu melech godel. So with a vav, it's melech godel. Okay, magdil hu chaser yud. Actually, the word magdil is written without a yud. If you take the Sefer Tilim, you'd see it's actually written mem gimel daled lamed. It's just a chirik is added in, but it's written without a yud. V'chirik chaser yud, v'chirik below yud hu melech koton. So he's saying that the weekday is a melech koton, and Shabbos is a melech godel. He says another reason, magdil is in Tilim. And at that point, Dovin, when Dovin composes Tilim, is not yet a melech. Migdol is in Nevi'im, and by then, chronologically, he's already melech. So it's both it's an interesting point about the chronology. But so this is what the Abu Darham points out, that magdil should be spelt without a yud, just with a chirik. Migdol should be spelt with a vav. Curiously, so here we have beneath this quote. So let's go to the bottom left. So this is from the Siddur Torah. So it has magdil with a yud, and it has migdol without a vav. So it's just the opposite of the diyukim which the Bartanura put in. Bartanura had said magdil is written, as you can see, in the Tilim is without a yud, just a chirik, and migdol is with a vav. So that's curious that the diyukim are not kept to in the Siddur. Now let's go to the right, bottom right. This is from the Siddur Shklov Tafkuf Samar Gimel. This is the first print which we have of the Alter Rebbe Siddur. So there we have magdil there. It's spelled also with a yud. The question remains. Migdol is spelled there with a vav. Okay. Now the Tilis Hashem Siddur, which we are familiar with from childhood, is a copy of a Siddur printed in Vilna. I've mentioned this before. The Seder HaAvodah was printed in Vilna Tofresh Ayin Aleph. There were areas where, for some reason, when the Tilis Hashem Siddur was published in Tofshin Vov or somewhere in the 40s, some areas they did not copy from the Seder HaAvodah. Instead, they took copies from the Torah Or Siddur. Curiously, for this part was taken from the Torah Or Siddur, not from the Seder HaAvodah. I have a copy of the Torah Or Siddur, and now take a look at that. Sorry, of the Seder HaAvodah. Yeah, take a look at that. So there it has magdil is spelt taka there without a yud, and migdol is spelt with a vav. And I've said this before, that the Seder HaAvodah, the original of the Tilis Hashem Siddur, is actually in a way much more medukduk. In many ways, it's more accurate than the Torah Or Siddur. I don't mean accurate in far as that what the Alter Rebbe instituted. But there's a certain degree of diktuk, which is it's more accurate than what you see in the Torah Siddur. So just a fascinating insight about this Migdal and Magdil. Let me just go to the chat, and that will close the evening. I see here, someone writes the following. As I recall, unless it was a different incident, so it was told was in an event of Tammuz by Shem Tov, Hanukkah lighting, President Clinton house after lighting the number of lights for the evening, he asked he could light more. Rabbi Shem Tov related that when the Rebbe received a report of the event, he was not happy about it. Okay, fine. So yeah, you're corroborating what I said. It was about that the president had asked for lighting more candles than the halacha, and the Rebbe was saying, if you're a shliach, so you put your foot down, so to speak, even though it might be a little bit uncomfortable. All right, so that's what I want to share with you tonight, and I wish you all, as I said before, guten Chodesh and a freilichen Chanukah and simchas and gesund Tomit Kol Hayomim.
Chodesh,